Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Sales Hacker webinar. My name is Scott Parker, Head of Partnerships and Revenue at Sales Hacker, and I'm lucky enough to get to moderate this discussion today. Very excited for it. And the topic of discussion today is this idea of a fresh approach to sales performance. So we always, look at our ops and our enablement people to make little tweaks on our sales performance to drive that number up. And what we're going to be talking about is looking at through a different lens and actually looking at it through workplace equality and how that can actually drive up all your business outcomes. So before I introduce some of my awesome guests that I do have today, really quickly, just some housekeeping matters. So number one, if you've ever joined a Sales Hacker webinar, you know that these are recorded. So if you got to jump off and go to a 101 or you got to close the deal, make sure you do so. We'll have this in your inbox probably within about 24 hours. So it is coming. And second, we do these webinars very much for the community, right? So if you have any burning questions, if maybe you are an equality champion at your organization and you're struggling in different areas, we want to hear from you. So jump on. There's a little Q&A section down there at the bottom. So hop on, tell us your name, what company you work for, and any questions as they come up. We definitely want to hear from you. But now that I have that out of the way, I do want to introduce my three guests. I am joined by Lori Richardson, Ann Wofford, and Roisin Hughes. Ladies, welcome to the community.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Fun to have you all. And as always, I do like to just dive into a bit more about your backgrounds, just for the sake of the community. So Lori, I'll start with you. Lori Richardson, for those of you who don't know, if you've never been on LinkedIn or never been to a sales conference, I'll give you her intro because she's seemingly everywhere. But Lori is the CEO of Score More Sales, which is a top B2B sales strategy firm, and is also president of Women's Sales Pros, which at Sales Hacker we work closely with. It's basically a community created to help move the needle for more women in sales and sales leadership roles specifically. And you speak throughout North America. I've seen you speak before, evangelizing about how a career in sales, how great it can be for women, and also teaches sales leaders how to build and fix sales teams for more revenue. I know you've had sales, biz dev, sales leadership roles with some small companies, just Apple, IBM, Thomson Reuters, just the small ones, among other companies. And I know you began your sales career as a single mom in your early 20s selling technology, which is really cool. Yep. And you've really been involved in the sales ecosystem ever since. And I was down at AASP. When was it in Chicago?
In Chicago? April 17th, my birthday.
It was it? No way. That's cool.
My birthday, yeah.
I was down there and watched Lori receive the 2019 Lifetime Achievement Award from the Association for Inside Sales Professionals, which was really cool. And that was...
Which means I'm old.
I don't know about that. I'd say it means you had a big impact. Let's go with that.
Thank you.
No problem. And last but not least, you have a book coming out, I understand, as well, called She Sells, which will be available in October, correct?
Yep, correct.
Amazing. Sweet. And what's kind of the overall premise of the book? I can make some assumptions, but...
It's stories about women in sales and their male allies that support them. And I think we need more examples out there. And so we're trying to share as many as we can. Awesome.
Love it. And we have two more amazing examples here. So moving on to Ann Wofford. So Ann is the AVP for Heroku Cloud Sales at Salesforce, which Heroku was acquired, I think it was almost 10 years ago now. Is that right?
That's accurate. Yes, it's been about 10 years. It's been a great ride.
That's awesome. And you're a San Francisco native, so you've been in the ecosystem of tech for a while. And you began your career in sales at Sun Microsystems and Symantec, joining Salesforce in 2010 as a senior account executive for over 3 years after pursuing career opportunities, including joining a startup. So you jumped into that realm.
I did.
Which is always fun. How was that transition?
It was great. I loved it. So the person that hired me at Salesforce went to a startup and said, hey, why don't you come along? I did it, but my home was at Salesforce. I came back and I was lucky to participate in their IPO that they had. So it was an awesome experience.
That's awesome. Cool. So you found your way home, so to speak, and now you've worked your way up to where you currently are. And you're also the mom of two teenagers.
I am.
And a sales leader for the US, Canada, and Latin American regions for Heroku Cloud Sales.
Yep. Thanks.
Very cool story. And last but not least, we have Roisin, also known as Ro, so I'm going to call you Ro from here on out, Hughes, who is also AVP at Salesforce for the financial services vertical. And you actually began your career at Procter & Gamble and Enterprise Rent-A-Car and joined Salesforce 8 years ago, actually on the sales development team at their EMEA headquarters in Dublin, and then moved to Salesforce's Chicago hub as it opened in 2012 and helped set up really the sales development group over there. And you were the first senior sales rep and first business development rep on that team. Is that right?
It is, yes.
Yeah, and then
I've grown quite a bit since then.
Just a little bit. Went from 6 individuals to over how many? 300 now.
Something about that, yeah.
Like
it's in the hundreds, which is crazy.
That's awesome. And most recently, of course, you became the AVP for the Midwest and Southwest within the financial services vertical, and a team that helps rapidly expand the Salesforce ecosystem. And we were talking before, and you've loved kind of the fast-paced, high-growth environments, and are a big proponent, and you're proud to champion a lot of these themes of diversity and inclusion at Salesforce, which is very at the forefront of really everything that you guys do at Salesforce, which is cool. All right. Well, let's dive into it. Now that we've got the backgrounds, let's go. I would love to just do a really quick round robin and maybe just tell the audience something cool that maybe wasn't in your bio. And then the second piece, just what equality means to you. And Ro, let's start with you.
Sure, I'll start with what equality means to me, which will lead to something cool that wasn't included in my bio. So I think that equality to me really is the creation of a level playing field in society and in the workplace. And to me, that includes diversity, so ensuring that all types of people are at the table, and inclusion, those people treating each other with respect no matter who they are. The cool thing about me is that I've gotten to have a unique perspective as a woman and as a gay person of the impact that keeping equality at the forefront of our minds in business can have on people. And Salesforce has obviously been at the forefront of that journey in recent years. I personally have benefited from that journey. A great example of the evening of the playing field is when my wife and I decided to create a family a few years ago. Obviously, our journey was going to be different to that of a straight couple. And so we started diving into the details of insurance and IUI and IVF and all that fun stuff. And we quickly realized that traditional insurance just automatically doesn't cover gay people for IVF. As soon as we uncovered that, I also uncovered that here at Salesforce, there was already a task force set up internally to tackle that inequality.
And within a few months, Salesforce had completely changed their approach to the insurance for IVF and brought in a new insurance partner that didn't exclude the gay population from its coverage. And as a result, my wife and I were able to embark upon that journey as if it was a level playing field, and it totally changed, obviously the financial, but also the emotional impact of that journey.
That's a great story, and often things like that, are the things when we talk about leveling the playing field that, frankly, I've never thought of that before, right? And sometimes you wouldn't unless you're actually actively going through it, and that's awesome, and things that I think every organization should be very cognizant of that moving forward. That was awesome. Thanks for sharing. Marianne, yourself.
Sure. Let's see. Many years ago, I had the opportunity to, this is the fun thing, dance on stage with Prince. So,
wow.
Yes, many years ago. But that was a fun thing about me. I'm giving away all my secrets on, those warm-up things when you go to a meeting. But anyway, let's see. And what diversity sort of means to me is I thoroughly enjoy seeing employees from, different backgrounds, different cultures, working on the same thing. But being in sales, I love the ability for men, women, and different types of individuals being able to compete for the best opportunities. When I see that, that to me says that we have equality in the workforce, and particularly in sales. And one of the things at Salesforce we have is something called G for G, or Go for Growth. And what that does is allow all the employees to see what new promotions or new management jobs are going to be available. And it gives everybody an opportunity to compete for those roles at a level playing field. I know historically sometimes, new openings would only be granted or be whispered to a few people. But the G for G process at Salesforce really helps level the playing field and give everybody, male, female, diverse backgrounds, the ability to compete for the best jobs available in the technology industry. So, both what I love seeing is, that level playing field across the aisles, walking down the halls, but also in the ability to compete for the best roles.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And just to clarify, so the G for G would be basically just open sourcing opportunities, so everyone knows about them across the organization.
Exactly. Everyone knows, and it's all a level playing field.
Yeah, that's huge. Definitely have been part of those orgs that you're like, I didn't know that someone was, hiring for that position. Like, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, totally left out of the decision tree.
Yeah. I like that a lot. And Laura, yourself.
Well, I didn't dance with Prince. That would have been really cool. That's awesome.
There's still time.
But oh yeah, well, not with Prince, unfortunately, but I can still dance. You're right. Not everyone knows this, but before I got into sales, right out of high school, I became a preschool teacher. And so I literally worked with 2-year-olds before I got into sales. And it did have some parallels. I was a salesperson. I'm not putting salespeople down saying we're all 2-year-olds, but there's some parallels to working with kids and building great teams. And it gave me great knowledge about people. I just learned so much, and it was just a wonderful background. Because I'm focused in sales, I think that equality for me it's about treating people with respect and treating everyone in a way that they feel proud and happy to come to work. Because I don't work for Salesforce, which is in my opinion, a very evolved company. And, there are a lot of other companies out there that don't have the benefit of some of the things you're talking about, and they don't have diversity and inclusion teams. And so I'm out there talking to people who really want to be respected in their role. They want to be promoted. They want opportunities. They want more women and diverse folks on their sales team. So I'm hearing a lot of stories about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we can learn more about some of those stories in your book that's coming out. Excited to check that out. Okay, so we talked a little bit about, what equality means to each of you, but I would love to take that a step further and kind of in your own words, how would you describe equality in the workplace as a whole? And Marianne, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think, we've touched on a lot of those points, but, it's just the ability to be treated exactly like everybody else. There may be something different about you, whether it's your gender or whether, it's your nationality, but everybody just wants to be treated with respect and treated equally when they bring themselves to work. And that's really what it is. It's treat me just as you would everyone else, respect my differences, but treat me as, a colleague, someone you would trust to do the job equally as you would another peer.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Ro, anything to add there?
Not at all. And I think the notion of finding ways to help everybody bring their whole selves to work. I know it's a bit of a catchphrase, but what I mean by that is creating safe environments where diversity is not just accepted, but is celebrated. And back to the word that will be mentioned throughout this session, the idea of respect and ensuring that everybody treats each other with respect.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Lori, last but not least, any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we've seen an evolution from diversity, which is like hire these people, to really immersion and inclusion and really building teams of people who think differently, who have different ideas, who, look like our customers do. And customers are asking for this now. It's really important. And now it's really what I think of it as just good sales culture, having that safe environment, like Ro was talking about, and feeling like you're contributing. So, the great thing about sales is that you're judged by your performance. And that's what I always liked about it. It's not gray. I sold things. I built my portfolio of clients, or I didn't, and so I love that about sales, that it's really black and white. As long as everyone's getting the same opportunities, they're getting the same pay and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so my next question, I'll go back to you, Lori, on this, because I love that idea of kind of the next iteration of diversity being inclusion and then also full immersion. Because you can't just, have a diversity initiative and then move on. It needs to be an ongoing thing.
Right.
And since you talk to, a lot of organizations on this topic, can you describe what an equal and inclusive sales team looks like today?
Well, I think the best way to say it is that it looks like your customers do, and it represents a variety of mostly thought. If we can get diversity of thought, we can have more creative sales teams. And so we have to look in different places when we're hiring. We have to do different things. We may need to onboard differently. Some of the research that I've seen recently is that in the case of women and men is that, women have some different skill sets, and there's all sorts of interesting things that we're working on discovering now. So being open and knowing that we all bring biases to the workplace. We're human beings, and we have to recognize that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that idea of making sure your team looks like your customers do. Because even diversity, inclusion aside, that's just good business. I always found it interesting when I sold into marketing for most of my career, and on the marketing side of the house, you see a lot more women typically in marketing functions. And then there was all these males selling into marketing. And I often thought, even very early in my career, it's like something's not aligned here. Like, I think there could be a lot more opportunity to have better lines of communication if we matched the demographic of our customer a little bit more. So it's an interesting point to bring up. And Ro, I'll put the same question on you, because I'm sure you lead a team of an equal and inclusive sales team. So what does that actually look like? Can you describe that for us?
Yes, I think to Laurie's point, obviously including as much of a diverse audience in your team as possible is step one. But I think that the idea of team selling is really important here at Salesforce as well. Gone are the days that it's one person out for themselves in technology sales. And so not just the diversity of my team, but each of my team members, each account executive has a selling team around them. And the diversity of that team is really important as well. That's that diversity of thought. It impacts how we go to market. It impacts how we interact with our customers. And so ensuring that that's the case, number one, helps with the sale in that way. But number two, I think one of the main reasons why any individual contributor joins a company like Salesforce, a fast-growing, innovative tech company, is because they want to learn and thrive and grow. And it's really hard to do all those things if you're surrounded by people that come from the same background as you and have the same thought process as you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So you look at it, what I'm hearing is you look at it, diversity and inclusion on like a macro level, so the whole team, and then also making sure on a micro level, when you have the individual selling teams, that those are all made up of people from different backgrounds and different thought patterns. Yes.
And I think that specifically regarding teams and the inclusion element of equality, as leaders and as individual members of those teams, the idea of asking questions and having a really open, inclusive environment where it's safe to answer questions is hyper important and something that we concentrate a lot on. The notion of learning and growing from each other, that's something that I think organizations have to make a conscious effort around. For example, on my team, every time we gather, the 50 team members of my team gather once a month to kick off the month, we spend about a quarter of that meeting looking back on the previous month and sharing ideas and learning. And we explicitly say, check the egos at the door, and we celebrate the idea of people sharing their learnings and where they may have failed and what they would do differently. And that simple act, I think, does a lot to increase the inclusion levels and the safety of those moments.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I would love to dive into that a little bit more. As a leader, how do you think about creating that environment where it's okay to ask some dumb questions, where it's okay to talk about failures? What are some things that because not every culture is like that, especially sales where it's very hyper competitive. What are some, actionable things that leaders can do to foster a team like that?
I think it sounds simple, but I think the first thing is to ensure that you're allowing time for that specific activity within your meetings. Having time allotted to questions, having time allotted to learning. As a leader, asking questions, I try to spend the majority of my time in meetings asking questions rather than offering solutions. I think the fact that as a leader, you display that behavior, it not only encourages others to do the same, but it also opens up the conversation, opens up the floor, and opens up the dynamic if you're asking questions rather than telling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that.
And how you ask, I was just going to say how you ask the questions too, right? Because I know as an extrovert, I used to ask too quickly and I just move on to the next thing. And some people need a process. They need time to process, right?
Yeah,
yep.
Totally. No one wants, to feel like they're getting almost interrogated, right? And sometimes when have a quick cadence, it can feel that way. But I love that. So just making sure that you have the time and then asking more questions than you're just providing solutions. I like that. And Marianne, I'll go with the same question onto you. When you look at your team, can you describe kind of what it looks like to be equal and inclusive on your sales team?
Yeah, I think to me, that inclusion is very closely tied to employee retention, right? So you can, hire like crazy, bring people on board, but if they don't feel that inclusion, they're going to make other decisions. The technology hiring industry is very competitive at this stage. Employees are the ones with the power, right, to walk and decide, where they're going to spend their time and where they're going to work. And so, that inclusion, it's bringing, their true self, like Ro indicated. It's giving the team, the folks, a voice. It's one-on-one meetings, right? So it's not just all about the team, but it's me spending time as a leader, understanding, an individual's, background, where he's coming from, what their motivations are, and, the challenges that they might be facing individually. So me as a leader spending individual time with some of the, folks that may have a challenge with the, inclusion, just making sure that pathway to retain them is there and to make them highly successful.
Yeah, that makes total sense, because there's definitely, when you do those group style meetings, I know, having probably way too many of them in my career, that there's usually a few individuals that will kind of control or influence a lot of an overwhelming amount of the conversation based on how many people are there. I have found. And
absolutely.
So the one-on-ones, for me, there's people that are more, introverted and need more time to maybe think about their thoughts, write them down, because we all have different styles of information retention. I think that's a great way to sidestep that is making sure you're doing that one-on-one time. All right, moving on to some really actionable ways that we can approach this. And Lori, I'm gonna start with you on this one. When you talk to organizations or someone comes to you and they're really excited about this conversation, as the many people who signed up for this webinar most likely are, what are some ways that you can champion equality in the workplace? Like, if I wanted to take that on head on and start this week, what are some things that I could do?
Well, what I was thinking of as Ro and Marianne were talking, they're both examples of women who have risen within the organization. And retention is tough. It's a tough thing in this economy. And it's tough with women in a lot of cases, because if women don't see leaders who are like them, or if, they feel like their opinion isn't counted or as important, they'll end up leaving. And so what I thought about was the frontline sales managers who, again, outside in the outside world out there with a lot of startups, there are a lot of people who were a salesperson who did very well and they got promoted to manager, and they have no manager background. They don't really know. They know how they picked up the phone and made 1,000 cold calls. Or whatever the case may be, and then they expect others to do the same thing to be successful. And I've actually heard young, usually I don't mean young in the sense, I mean newer managers who are typically male, who would think that a woman might not be as successful because she sounds too nice, or because she's yeah, I never heard right. Or she talks about this call. Oh, I have to call Scott, and I hope he's, I hope he answers. And what am I going to say? women tend to verbalize more. So there's some natural things that we do as women. We're different. Women are different than men. And that's a great thing. But we just need to train people properly. So I think about training frontline salespeople, mid-level, everyone to know about how to work with different people, different styles, all the way around.
I was muted. That's great. So I've actually heard that it's not just a gender thing either. I've heard that in my career. Like,
right.
Oh, Scott's too nice to sell. He won't be able to do it. So I heard that a lot when I was young, and it's really about realizing, gender aside, that people will sell completely different, across the board, and having different options for training and also process is super important. Yeah. Ro, I'll go with you on this one because you did this, right? You became a champion of equality at Salesforce. What were kind of your first steps in doing that? And what would you say to people that are, I don't know, maybe nervous or don't know where to begin?
Yeah, I think that recognizing the importance of it is probably number one. As an individual contributor or as a leader, there is a lot to be gained from becoming an equality champion, both in the workplace and also with your customers. The notion of unconscious bias, which I'm sure we'll chat about shortly, it applies not only to how we think about and treat our coworkers and leaders and team members, but also to how we treat our customers and think about deals and make assumptions. And so I think that step one is understanding the value in making this a priority as you think about how you approach your work. And step two is a really simple one. It's thinking about something really easy that you can do that might make that initial difference. I'll give you an example. When I was an individual contributor quite early on in my career, my VP at the time changed. We have an internal collaboration tool at Salesforce called Chatter, and we use it. It really is the hub of all of our data and collaboration. And so you have a Chatter profile, which is a picture that shows up every time you chat on there. And my VP changed his Chatter profile to have an overlay of the rainbow flag one day during Pride Month. And the moment I saw that, it had an immense immediate impact on me. It was a really easy thing for him to do, I assume. But it was a profound impact on me. I walked a little bit taller that day and every day since. I pinged him to thank him because it was a really effective way of him showing his allyship of me and his team, and the fact that he was dedicated to the kind of inclusion that inspired me. So there are really simple ways like wearing a Pride t-shirt or wearing my Bold Force t-shirt, which I wear with Pride regularly. The more visible you can make your allyship, and the more visibly and vocally you can ensure that you are championing equality, the more effective it is. And on the vocal front, I think every little interaction that we have at work every single day matters, in particular leaders, because leaders' behavior is amplified across a group of people, but individual contributors as well. How you treat everyone in your day-to-day is important and matters and can have an impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like it. So yeah, understanding the value, and then pay attention to the small things, and don't overlook the small things that can have a massive impact. And I do like that as framing it a little bit like this. This can be really great for your personal career and for your bottom line paycheck, because this is what the market and your customers are telling us that they want. They're basically screaming it. You can see it everywhere now. I like it. Marianne, what about yourself? What are some actionable ways that you did when you first started becoming an equality champion, and then maybe that you pass on for other people to get started?
Absolutely. I think it's, be your authentic, genuine self, right? That's number one. people can smell when you're inauthentic, and they can smell when you're, managing up, right, versus, managing to everyone. The other thing that, we do at Salesforce is we have employee resource groups, like we call them our equality groups. And they are groups of, active individuals in a community. So, for example, I'm part of the Salesforce Women's Network. I'm also part of something called Bold Force, which is our African American resource group. And I'm also part of something called Ability Force, which is a newer resource group that focuses on people at the company or their families who may have a disability or an ability challenge. And interesting story there is that I joined that group because, my manager had someone in his family that had an ability challenge. And I've learned so much about, what his life is like outside of the office. And I understand, maybe some of the challenges, that he has had. And likewise, with Bold Force, we'll talk about maybe discrimination. There'll be events around what kind of books to read, about African Americans in business or history. And when you become an ally of a group that you may not be familiar with, your mind expands. It opens up to, let me look beyond just this person that I think I know in the office and look at them as a full person. So these are some of the things that I've done in order to, champion that.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. And I'm sure it also has, you're talking about these ideas that need to be shared and discussed with your colleagues, but I'm sure it also has business impact, right? When you spend time with someone talking about whatever it is, you feel much more close to them. You feel like you can approach them with maybe things that are more business driven as well, which must be a cool byproduct of those groups that you're a part of.
And I find that our clients as well, they love modeling, what Salesforce is doing, whether it's our VTO time or, just at Dreamforce, right? Of like we have an equality summit at Dreamforce. Yeah. And our customers rave about being able to see that in action, even though, their organizations might not champion that. And then they go and they multiply that, right? They multiply that and bring that across, to other businesses. So it's a great feeling of the things that Salesforce does and the things that, Salesforce exposes to our community of customers.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So I would encourage anyone who's listening to this as an amazing next step would be go and start an employee resource group at your own company, whether it's a 20-person startup or a 10,000-person organization. I think that's an awesome way to do it. Just pick something you're super passionate about, and you'll find others that will follow. So let's dive a little bit more into that. And because I think a lot of organizations kind of get scared and they get caught up in, we've got our quarter numbers, we all have numbers to hit, we've got crazy hiring goals, we've got all of these things happening, 1,000,001 things. And sometimes this can be a priority, 2 or 3 that keeps going down the list. And as a leader, how do you give your permission to take the time to focus on these things? Like to be an active member of Bold Force. I'm sure it takes a little bit of time. How do you enable your teams and tell them it's okay to be active in groups like this? And Ro, I'll start with you here.
Sure. I think the easiest thing as a leader to do is to be part of a couple of the groups yourself and to display the behavior that you want your team to mimic and feel comfortable mimicking. I also try to promote events that are going on. I'm a member of our LGBTQ group, Outforce. I'm a member of Earth Force. and I participate as much as possible in some of the other ERG events that are taking place throughout the year. And by doing that, by promoting the events, by turning up to them myself, I feel like that is sending a strong message to the team that I encourage and expect that from them as well. So, doing something as simple as in a meeting or even in a one-on-one, reviewing whether or not they are members and asking them about their interest level, or what they are inspired by, to Marianne's point earlier, in a one-on-one, getting to know what motivates my team at a personal level. If they're involved in anything outside of work, how can we incorporate that into one of the groups or one of the events or one of the volunteer opportunities here at Salesforce? And so really simple, again, just doing it myself and also promoting it and being very explicit about my support of their time being spent on those engagements.
Right. So leading by example, being very vocal. Marianne, anything to add there?
Yeah, I'd say we put it in the development plans, so every employee has an opportunity to write down their goals for the year. We have a process internal to the company that everybody, standardizes on. And, they don't have to take 4 hours every week, right, to be an ally or an advocate. But, you could find a couple of hours a quarter. And you'd be surprised, at how you can measure that, add that into your development plan. And that provides, promotability. It shows, genuine enthusiasm for, the principles that the organization, not only revenue, principles and bringing in sales, but, principles that round the whole organization and what we want to do in the market. And so build that into, your quarterly development plan, your annual development plans, and you'll be shocked at, the results that you get.
Mm-hmm. That's huge. Yeah, that's great. And okay, Lori, I've got a question for you, and one that's one of the, as we're going through, I'm excited to ask this question because myself, I'm a Caucasian male. I would fit the stereotype in a seller. Probably pretty to a T. Maybe add 20 years on me. I don't know. But what does it mean to be an equality ally? Like, this is extremely important to me. I think we should be talking about this more and more. What does it mean to be an equality ally?
It means what you're doing right now, Scott. Being comfortable in this conversation is huge, and being leading a conversation that lots and lots of people can hear. It's about being comfortable talking about different topics, and in meetings, it's about speaking up on behalf of a woman whose voice maybe didn't get heard. Maybe this is a common thing that a woman will say something sometimes and then a man will say it later, and everyone loves that idea. And to go back and say, oh, I'm glad you like Rose's idea. As a man, as a male, you can do that. And there's no doubt, I'm just focused on women, getting more women in sales and sales leadership, because it's just so crazy that it hasn't developed further than it has in all the years that I've been in sales. But it goes way beyond men and women. But in the case of men and women, it takes men to help solve this issue, just like it does with any other inclusion topic. It takes everybody working together. Women can't sit around and figure it out on our own and just make it happen. Can't do that. It takes everybody. So speaking up and lobbying on behalf of a woman when it's time for promotions and only men are mentioned. And again, in companies outside of Salesforce, this happens all the time. And picking up on little irritants, a little comment that's made, because we found that women get very frustrated at the little things that a little diss here and a little diss there. That's what builds up sometimes. And just speaking up to say, hey, that doesn't really sound right to me. Or I'll say, what what did you say? You know, and kind of joke around about it. I also believe in giving people a benefit of the doubt and not just jumping on someone. Hey, Scott, you said something, you know, that offended me. But just listening, and if something is building up and you feel something, you know, to be comfortable to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Great advice. And I think you're totally right. If we go too far where everyone's almost like walking on eggshells all the time, then we can't get the dialogue that needs to happen to actually full on address this issue. So thanks for that. And I'll open that question up, Marianne, to yourself. How, when you look at equality allies in the workplace, what does that mean to you, and what are some things that equality allies can do?
Yeah, I loved her, you know, response there of like doing the things that you're doing. It's just all about, you know, our allies being vulnerable, right? So just know that, you know, every day when a, you know, minority comes into the business world, or, you know, somebody who's, you know, LGBT, when they come into the workplace, you know, they're anticipating, right, that there's going to be some challenges for them. So, you know, they're vulnerable. Therefore, I think that, you know, the leaders that are already in the company have to be vulnerable as well, open their offices, you know, open their calendars and their time to make the people that, you know, are trying to, you know, be inclusive and be included in the company and the growth, make time and be vulnerable back. And just know that, you know, in the long term, you might step on an eggshell here or there, or it might feel uncomfortable, but just know that the person on the other side of the table talking to you is feeling the very same way. But both of you are making an effort, and then that effort is going to change, you know, culture long term.
Yeah, totally. Vulnerability is so key, and you see it even on, you know, little like social media trends and things now, like when you show your authentic, vulnerable self, that's what people I find are really relating with now. So whether it's, you know, a one-on-one, or even when you're talking to your prospects, I think it can't be understated how important and powerful vulnerability could be.
Absolutely.
And Ro, yourself, when you look at equality allies?
Yeah, I think the ladies ahead of me just said it perfectly. I think the act of asking questions is okay. Being curious is okay. Speaking up is tremendously important. Speaking up, and to Laurie's point, not assuming the worst, but asking what maybe somebody meant by something that maybe sounded off to you. The more visible you can be in your allyship, the better. It's funny, when you were describing yourself, Scott, it reminded me of my brother, who is could be a mirror image of you. He's a white guy, straight white guy, who, you know, doesn't necessarily belong to any of the minority groups, but based on my experience, and Salesforce is the first company that I've worked at that I've been openly out in. And based on my experience working while I was in the closet versus working when I wasn't in the closet, and sharing that with him, he was blown away by the difference that made to me personally and also professionally and in terms of my production. And so he took it upon himself to set up his LGBT resource group at his company. And he's a leader at that company. And I think the fact that it was led by a white guy had a much bigger impact than if it had even been set up by a member of my community. And so you can't underestimate the importance of being part of those resource groups. If resource groups are just are without allies, it becomes a vacuum of thought, and it actually becomes quite an exclusive environment. And including allies in resource groups is a critical element of them.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing. That's awesome, and definitely powerful to hear. And it's funny, I didn't think about that, because then if you do have this vacuum of just one, ethnicity or LGBTQ, whatever it is, group, then you don't have diversity of thought either. right? So that's an interesting way of kind of making sure it doesn't go too far that way as well. So let's talk a little bit about how, like, what is the business value of inclusion? And Lori, I know you have some really cool research coming out. You've done some really cool research, specifically in the sales vertical, and this is Sales Hacker, so we can go there. But what is kind of the business value of inclusion? You know, is there an ROI that we can put on this? Because sometimes, you know, unfortunately, that's what drives things home for big business. We are switching into being more, you know, socially responsible business, but there still, unfortunately, are a ton of industries, ton of organizations that are bottom line driven. How can we frame it for those organizations? And Lori, I'll start.
Yeah, I mean, there are people listening to this that are saying, well, this is all fine and good, but I need to hire 5 sellers, you know, by the end of the month. And I can't just wait for enough women candidates to show up. So, you know, we want the best. We don't, you know, it doesn't matter to it. And I hear that a lot. I've seen it a lot on LinkedIn. And the point is, you know, it doesn't have to be an either or. It's a mindset. It's a leadership strategy where, first of all, we know that customers want buyers that look like them. And so it's a dollars and cents issue right there, because I've actually seen companies that lost an opportunity because it was all white guys that showed up to a diverse group of buyers, and they did not get the deal. We also know that when men and women work together on a team, they create more revenue. If it's all women or all men, it's less revenue. And there are a lot of leadership, McKinsey and some other people have done research on that. I've seen a lot of sales programs at universities where women end up usually being the top people in a number of different programs. And, you know, my thing isn't whether women are better at selling than men or not, but if they're as good, then why don't, you know, maybe there should be 50% women in a lot of our sales forces and not the lower numbers that we see. And I'm talking about manufacturing and distribution and telecom and, you know, a lot of other industries in addition to SaaS and tech. So it's very widespread. There are a lot of very male majority teams, but there's a dollars and cents case, and there are ways to hire as quickly as you can and work to build visibility and grow your program so that people are attracted to it that are not all one type of person. Absolutely.
And I've heard, definitely heard a lot of the same. I think, again, at AISP, I was speaking to a gentleman who runs the UT Dallas sales program. And
Dr. Dover. Yeah.
Dr. Dover. Yeah. He was either top 2 or top 3 were all women, which I found really interesting. And he's got some cool ideas about the future of the workforce, just because he's seeing it firsthand and how women are accelerating. Ro, yourself, when you try and put a business value on inclusion, how do you look at that?
Everything that Lori just spoke about is just fact. It's just science. We all just need to embrace it and do our best to have as much diversity of thought and approach in our business as possible. On a more kind of personal level and more oriented towards the inclusion side of equality, when I think about that, I think back to a book I read once that explains that your brain asks itself 5 times every second whether or not it is safe. And if the answer to that question is no, the productivity of your brain automatically turns down by some crazy percentage. And I think about that when I think about myself and how I was, if we just take the LGBT example, thinking about the fact that at the end of a weekend, when I was in a workplace where I wasn't out of the closet, a decent amount of my productivity was taken up with my brain thinking of the things that I supposedly did over the weekend and hiding parts of me that just were totally unnecessary to hide. But I also just didn't feel safe. I didn't feel my full self. I wasn't bringing my full brain activity to my work. Yeah. And when you multiply that across everybody on your team who may or may not feel safe in whatever way, that is an unbelievable amount of productivity lost and an unbelievable amount of ideas not shared and learnings not learned. And so on a more personal level, I think about it in that way. And I think that it's a very clear ROI associated with that.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Do you remember what that book was? I'm obsessed with brain science, and it sounds extremely interesting.
I believe it was a chapter within the coaching habit. And he may have been referencing another book, a scientific book, but it was an example given within coaching. And that's an excellent book in general that I recommend all leaders to read. Awesome.
I'm gonna check it out. So I want to get to two more questions, but Marianne, do you have anything quick to add just on the business value side?
Yeah, I mean, for me, in my history, it's been growth, right? Mm-hmm. So it's all about right now, companies, especially in technology, it's how quickly we can grow, how quickly we can expand to new markets. And if you are just being very inclusive about, who you're hiring, so that's all a cookie cutter, prototype of a human being that you have some preconceived notion is going to do well, you're limiting the growth of your organization, the growth of your company, and ultimately the growth of your bottom line. So.
Absolutely. Would agree. All right. So last two questions. I want to talk a little bit about inclusive meetings, which we touched briefly on, and then this idea of unconscious bias, which I think is really important. So first one, and Marianne, I'll go back to you on this one. This idea of inclusive meetings, right? We've got introverts, we've got extroverts, we have different people from all different walks of life in the same meeting. How do we make sure that it's an inclusive environment and everyone is feeling like they're heard?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of approaches to that. I think one of the, initial approaches I have is I always try to start a meeting on just a very general topic where, folks can weigh in and feel comfortable. It doesn't have to be about business. Some days I start a meeting and I have a remote team and we're literally, in 7 cities talking on the phone. I start off, hey, what's the weather? And you'll be surprised at how people's, their armor breaks down immediately when they say, hey, this is what we're dealing with in Chicago, et cetera. Or we'll talk about, what are you going to enjoy for donut day or, something. And then that helps roll the conversation into, beefier topics where, people don't feel isolated, where they've already spoken up, so therefore I might as well speak again. It's simple, communication tactics, that you can use to get people to open up on beefy things that you might be discussing.
That's awesome. I'm just wondering when I'm getting invited to Donut Day at Salesforce.
See, we've got cupcakes. We're big on cupcakes. We have a lot of Salesforce cupcakes.
All right. Next time I'm down at HQ, I'll make sure it's on Donut Day. So moving on, because I do want to get this one kind of last question in, because I do love brain science. I think it's an important part of this discussion. So we all walk around with so much unconscious bias. Some of it we're aware of. A large portion is unconscious. We don't know it's happening. How do you tackle that? And Ro, I'll start with you in the workplace. Is this idea of unconscious bias that some people don't even know that they have this in place?
Yes, I think there are a few ways. The first is obviously just acknowledging that it exists in each and every one of us, no matter where we're coming from or who we are. It exists. In terms of how to tackle it, I think that there are a couple of ways that companies and leaders and individuals can tackle it at a systemic level. And so ensuring that systemic unconscious bias is not prevalent by thinking about how we assess for example, promotions, ensuring that we're using data-driven decisions and inspecting the data that we're using to ensure that bias isn't inextricably linked to that data when it comes to hiring and promotions and decisions that give people opportunity. I think that's certainly one thing to think about, and I'll leave it so each of the other ladies can contribute as well.
Mm-hmm. And Lori, any final thoughts here as we wrap up on unconscious bias?
Well, like I was saying before, we all have it in one form or another. I mean, I'm talking about women because that's what I do every day. But, you know, there's age bias, especially in technology companies. There's a lot of different things that we don't really think about. And so just to identify, you know, the possibility that you might be seeing something differently. And I've seen great male leaders who have spoken on panels and on this topic, and then they'll go back to their team and they'll say, hey, did I get that right? And they'll get feedback from the others on their team, and, you know, so that they can be even better. There's different types of, leanin.org has a really great resource about 5 different types of gender bias. And it's there are free resources online that you can read up, and I really like that resource because there are some things that are just in our society that we've thought about for years and years, and it's really great to talk about some of this stuff.
Absolutely. And Marianne, anything to add there?
No, I think, you know, just again, it's you know, open yourself to new experiences. Open yourselves up to cultures, you know, that you haven't interacted with, and you know, try to think, what is this unique? What is it that this person is bringing that's unique and going to help contribute to the success of our organization? So that would be the recommendation.
Awesome. Well, ladies, thank you so much for this discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Definitely eye-opening and things that we need to keep at the forefront of our minds all the time. And just so everyone knows, so I know Salesforce is currently hiring. So if you like a lot of the things that we discussed today, jump on Salesforce and put an application in. And what's the best way to interact with the three of you? Are you guys on LinkedIn, Twitter? If someone wanted to continue the conversation.
Yeah, I'm definitely a LinkedIn person.
Awesome.
As am I.
Perfect.
LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And I just want to give a shout out to Mark Benioff because he's a very charismatic leader at Salesforce who's really done a lot of visibility for this issue. And I think that's awesome for you all.
Absolutely. Yeah. Definitely leading the charge within tech. And I think a lot of people are following as they should be. And everyone who joined us in the community, thank you so much. If you want to read more on this, we actually teamed up with Salesforce, did an awesome blog on saleshacker.com, and there's actually a quality ebook as well, which is well worth the read. And we'll probably get that sent out to everyone when we send out the recording. But again, thank you, ladies, and have a great rest of your week.